Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are so excited to be with you tonight to celebrate The Whiteness of Wealth, a book by Dr. Dorothy A. Brown. And we're joined tonight as well by Dr. Maurice J. Hobson. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Hobson first. Dr. Hobson uses his love of history to strategically analyze some of the topics truest to his upbringing and livelihood. As a scholar, professor, and prominent American South historian, he presents his chronicles with an experiential and academically honed perspective on the national and international implications surrounding topics of electoral politics, race, and the Black New South. So welcome, Dr. Hobson. We're thrilled to have you here.
I am happy.
And welcome, Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown is an Asa Griggs Candler professor at Emory University School of Law, a graduate of Fordham University and Georgetown Law. She received her LLM in taxation from New York University. A national recognized scholar in the areas of race, class, and tax policy, she has published dozens of articles, essays, and book chapters on this topic. She has appeared on CNN, MSNBC, PBS, and NPR, and her opinion pieces have been published in CNN Opinion, Forbes, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. Born and raised in the South Bronx in New York City, Dorothy Brown currently resides in Atlanta, Georgia. And this is her debut book launch night. We are here celebrating fresh, hot off the presses. And we are joined by Auburn Avenue Research Library. They are going to be dropping extra resources in the chat throughout the night. So I want to let folks know those are going to be coming at you fast. But we want you to be focused on our main conversation here in the video, knowing that you can come back and look at these resources. This URL is just going to stay up. So you'll be able to come back and visit this as many times as you want to deepen your understanding, because I trust that we're going to have a lot of kind of deep things we're going to want to revisit tonight, because even though this book is very accessible, it is a deep subject. So the last thing I want to let you know is you can ask a question at any point in this conversation just by clicking this ask a question box at the bottom center of your screen. And we love to know where you're watching from. So feel free. We guess that there may be a lot of Atlanta folks. I see there's some New York folks, some Bronx folks. So yes, shout out where you're watching from. Let us know why you're here tonight. We love to know who's in the audience. We're very glad to have you all here. Glad to have some students in the audience. And congratulations, Dr. Brown. We're really thrilled about this book. It's a really important contribution.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, Professor Brown, first and foremost, I would like to publicly congratulate you for this wonderful and timely work. This book is beautifully written. It weaves in personal anecdotes with the cold, harsh reality of tax law and how it protects white wealth and strangles Black communities as a result of it. One point that you make that is very clear is how the concept of racism has been hidden in tax law. And amongst historians, there's a saying that the difference between historians and lawyers is text and context. Historians, I'm here to tell you, Professor Brown puts that to rest. And so first and foremost, welcome. And again, congratulations. I know you're from the boogie down Bronx, and I know New York is in the house. And yes. So this book is timely for so many reasons. Can you tell us what was your motivation for writing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my motivation for writing it was twofold. First of all, it had to do with how much resistance I was facing from law faculties as I would present my research, and the contrast with what would happen whenever I present my research to a general audience. The general audience wanted more. And I realized, this can't be an academic book. It has to be for the people, because I, want to inform, but more importantly, I want you all to be as angry as I am and fight for change.
Absolutely. And do this for me. What makes tax law unique?
I would argue that tax law is not unique. People like to put it in a box and say, it's different. So you can't apply the normal justice lens or the normal fairness lens, because tax law is, after all, neutral and objective. but the law is racist. So tax law it shouldn't surprise us that a law, our progressive income tax system that goes back to 1913, would have racist elements in it. So lots of people think tax is different, but it isn't. And my book shows it's just one more example where the law is used to disadvantage Black Americans while advantaging white Americans.
So, oftentimes I know most of the public, I know most of Karis's constituents, I know that they understand why books are written. But you as a law professor, when you write books, you have to write it and connect it to something. You have to challenge things. You have to contribute to in particular ways. And one of the points that you assert throughout this text, by and large, is the creation or the need for Black legal scholarship, which is an emerging field. And it contributes to the thoughts and ideas of the late attorney Jerome Cope. Can you further detail why Black legal scholarship is so important?
So yeah, Jerome wrote this article and he made the argument. Jerome was a law professor at Duke and he was fierce. And Jerome suffered no fools. And he published articles, he took them on. He was my hero and a mentor. And he wrote this article that said, we should be looking at the way law disadvantages Black Americans in every area of the law. So I'm reading this article and I basically picked it up to take a break from what I was teaching, which was partnership tax. I'm like, okay, I don't want to read any more of that. I want to read this fun article by Jerome. And towards the end of the article, it said, how do you know there isn't a race and tax problem if you don't look? And I went, race and tax? Really? And I picked up the phone and I called him and I said, Jerome, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something. And I think it may have taken me 3 or 4 years before I ultimately wrote my first piece on race and tax. But it's the idea that the law systematically oppresses Black Americans. And every area of the law should ask the question, what does race have to do with it?
You beautifully weave in metrics. I mean, you present data from many institutions. You do ethnography. You go and you talk to particular folk. But I want to do this. One of the things I realized and I found to be extremely heartwarming is your, tribute to your mother and father, the late James Brown and Miss Dottie. And
yes, Miss Dottie
did not suffer fools. And but you talk about them getting married. And in the first chapter of your book, you talk about this idea of marriage and tax law, because most people feel, the way marriage is presented now. I was, just to put it in context, this whole conversation around the royal family and, when you marry and how you bring together estates and what this means and whatnot. We assume that, marriage is bringing together of, certain estates so that you can get a lower wage for it, so that you can do particular things. But you really work against that, and you show us in a very powerful demonstration that marrying does not yield you anything, particularly if you are Black.
Yes. Yes. So here's how it works. The joint return can impact your taxes in one of 3 ways. They could stay the same, they could go up, or they could go down. Mm-hmm. What my research showed is when white people get married, they get a tax cut, their taxes go down. Why is that? Because white married couples typically have one wage earner with significantly more income than the other. The extreme example is where you have one spouse working in the paid labor market and the other spouse works at home. When they get married, they get a tax cut. The opposite experience was my parents. My mother was a nurse, my father was a plumber. They both worked full time and they made income closely together. So the household income was split 50-50. I did their tax returns and I would the inner feminist in me, I would root for my mother to make more money than my father. So some years she did, I'm like, yeah, mommy won this year. And then the next year my father would win. The problem is they both lost because as a result of their earning income close together, they paid higher taxes. That's called the marriage penalty. So what the first chapter shows is while many people think marriage is the way out of poverty, that is not true. For Black married couples, marriage does not result in a tax cut, and for decades resulted in higher taxes.
So I know we're talking about it in terms of race, but it seems as if that particular tax law also is extremely sexist. I mean, it's paternalistic because in reading the book, I understand that the way in which it's positioned is that the man supposedly makes this lion's share, and the woman is supposed to stay at home. And we know that those gender norms are not real. Can you speak to how, I mean, isms are isms. I mean, racism, classism, sexism, ageism, homophobism is prejudice plus the use and abuse of power, which creates laws and policies. Can you speak to how paternalism works into that in a very clear-cut kind of way as well?
So absolutely. And so the joint return came in 1948. In 1948, almost all white couples were the husband worked in the paid labor market and the wife stayed at home. That wasn't the case even in 1948 for Black married couples. So the fact that we could have predicted which couples would get a tax cut and which couples would not in 1948 based on race, but that's something obviously Congress ignored. So we see this, I would say, mindset, this encouragement to keep women out of the workforce. But let's be clear, it's white women. Black women have been working in the workforce since they brought us over in chains, just say it, right? So it's never been about protecting Black wives and having Black wives work at home. It's always been about white wives. Because who really are they competing against? White men in the market. So let's get them married, let's get them working at home and not working in the paid labor market, right? So there's that issue. But over time, more and more white women are contributing significant amounts to household income. And guess what? Their households were paying a penalty. So there was this middle class group of white households earning roughly between 60 and 90,000 that I found, where they were more likely to pay a penalty than get a bonus. So overall, most white couples get a tax cut when they get married, but this white group was not. Well, fast forward to 2017 and the Trump tax cuts, where in many instances, it eliminated the marriage penalty. Trump wasn't doing that to protect Black couples. He was doing that because more and more white couples were facing the penalty. So once again, we see tax law benefiting white couples and not Black couples, or disproportionately benefiting white couples.
I want to shift here. We can come back to that. I see that there's some questions, but we'll come back to that in just a second. We are in a particular moment in our society where education is accessible through Zoom, WebEx. I mean, we're on a screen to face, interface right now, which was accelerated by COVID-19. In chapter 3 of your book, titled The Great Unequalizer, you give the metrics of college education, and this is extremely eye-opening, where you look at top-tier private and public institutions, you look at historically Black colleges and universities, you look at two-year institutions, you look at the volatile nature of for-profit institutions, and because we live in Atlanta, we have all of that. I mean, we have the juggernaut of Black education, and we're in a moment. I mean, Beyonce is doing the whole piece Before I Let Go and featuring Southern, and we're in a moment. But we also have public institutions such as Georgia State University and Clayton State University that are minority serving, and then we have elite universities such as Emory that are working in these particular ways. By examining Atlanta's case, can you give us an understanding how tax law works for our college-aged folk in this city? Because this is a particular kind of case study. Now, I know that was a lot, so take your time.
So I'm going to start with the college chapter was the chapter that made me almost not finish the book. This chapter depressed me more than any other chapter. And let's be clear, I work with depressing data every freaking day. But the college chapter, and I'm going to tell you what it was. When I saw the statistic that said 60% of Black students who start college don't graduate, I was beside myself. I came face to face with my own privilege, right? I went to college. I took it for granted. Of course, I was going to graduate in 4 years. It never occurred to me. It was very eye-opening. I shut my computer. I went to the beach and I said, I'm never going back home. But a couple of hours of staring at the water, I said, okay, I'm gonna go back home and I'm gonna get back on this book tomorrow, but tonight I'm taking off. Okay, so, and the college chapter was also depressing because there's this narrative that if you just get a college degree, life is fine, but it isn't. So let's unpack that. Why isn't it? Well, first of all, selective institutions are not admitting a lot of Black students. But selective institutions have the highest graduation rates. So if you really want to talk about where do I go to college, selective institutions matter greatly because of their high graduation rates. The lowest graduation rates are found in for-profit colleges. Okay? Now, these selective institutions like Emory, they have multi-billion-dollar endowments.
Absolutely.
That are basically not taxed. There's a little excise tax, but it's nothing. It's really nothing. So all this wealth begets more wealth, tax-free, that they then use on their majority white student populations. Okay, so that's one piece of the tax puzzle. The other piece of the tax puzzle is Black students are more likely to self-finance their education by taking out debt. Well, when you take out debt, the goal is I will graduate. I will be able to pay off this debt because I got this great paying job because of the degree. Well, if 60% of the students drop out and never get the degree, they're still saddled with the debt. They just don't get any better job that pays better, that enables them to pay it off. A significant percentage of Black Americans go on to graduate school. Well, that means you got more debt, but you are deferring the debt while you're in graduate school, and it just, like a meter, it tick, 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 it just keeps going up. Well, tax law allows a deduction for interest, but not a lot, $2,500 max. Contrast that with, you can get interest on a mortgage up to $750,000. So we have this society that says, oh, education is really important, but we don't really back it with our tax policy. The other piece of it is contrast that with white college students who are more likely to have their parents or their grandparents pay for their college. So they wind up graduating with less debt, sometimes no debt because grandma or mom and dad have paid for it. And all of that is tax-free to them. So tax law reinforces the wealth-producing mechanism that selective institutions have, that white college students are the beneficiaries of, and disadvantage Black students and their families who have to finance the education.
You start this chapter with a very good anecdote about a young Morehouse man
Yes, Delon.
who had graduated in 2018 and was witnessing when Robert Smith pays off the student loan debt. And then you make reference to Rachel, who's a woman at Spelman. And then you talk to a woman by the name of Chris, who is a student at for-profit Argosy, which shut down.
Right.
The thing that was most troubling that I witnessed in that is in the previous chapter, you had discussed how, in so many years, and in such a period of time, that white family incomes that increased by so much, Latinx communities that increased by so much, but Black communities had decreased by $83. And we live in this world, particularly in a city like Atlanta, where if you take a history course, you juxtapose Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, and the professor oftentimes tries to push you to follow it Du Bois because you're in college like Du Bois wants you to be anyway. And you realize that notion of the talented 10 was a farce anyway, but we have to focus on the 90. I think you do an excellent job with this. In terms of our historically Black colleges, because like I said, we're in this moment, can you talk to us about, how does that work? You talk about two-year institutions and you talk about, the spectrum of this. Our historically Black colleges, because this is going to be a sobering and eye-opening experience for a lot of our young Black people.
So, when HBCUs do more with less. HBCUs have smaller endowments and they have students with lots of need, and the HBCUs work very hard. But their graduation rates are not nearly as high as at Emory, for example. They're like 100 times better than the for-profits, but they're not as good as selective institutions. But they provide this wonderfully rich experience. Rachel talked about it in her interviews. She went to Spelman. She saw lots of Black women just like her who were really smart, and nobody pointed and said, you're the only one, right? So, I call it racism triage. And racism triage is something every Black person deals with. There are some things you have to fight because if you don't, it's going to kill you. There are other things you just can't spend your time with it because if you fight everything, that's going to kill you. Racism triage in this instance is I can go to a historically white institution, but then I'm going to have to deal with racist nonsense. So I got good graduation rates, but this place gonna drive me crazy. Or I go to an HBCU where the graduation rates aren't as high, but I feel welcome. My professors reach out to me if I don't show up for class. So Black students are really between a rock and a hard place in terms of everything, and it's Black students, it's Black married people, it's Black homeowners, it's Black workers. Black people are between a rock and a hard place for how to navigate a system that was not designed for our success. And we only do that accepting trade-offs. We can't have it all. We just have as much as we can today and ignore some stuff tomorrow and then move on. But HBCUs are wonderful in the experience that they provide. The students, Rachel and Jalon that I talked about, they loved it. Poor Jalon is sitting there watching the class of 2019 have their debt forgiven, and he's like, dog nabbit, if I had just graduated next year, I wouldn't have debt. How sad it is that depending on the year you graduate means you're not going to be saddled with debt and your financial future looks so much brighter than if you graduated the year before. See, this has to change, right? So I advocate for debt forgiveness, but this just has to change.
So, this is an excellent segue to talk about home ownership. I received the book last week and I began to read it, and my wife prepares our taxes. And I've often said to her, I say, hey, do you want to hire a CPA to prepare our taxes? Because it becomes stressful for her. And I was like, because I think we should be getting more because we have a child, we bought a home, and we still have to pay more. And of course, with the last president and all of his shenanigans and tax hikes and whatever. But when I started reading this book, I told her, I said, you have to read this book. I live in a community in South DeKalb, which is the second most affluent area for Black people in the United States, to where my neighborhood is often showcased in the Washington Post. So Atlanta, the Black Mecca, DC, Chocolate City. You have this whole thing. And one of the things that's articulated is in my community, which is it's a nice community. It's on a river. If I lived north of the city, my house would be worth 10 times as much. But I might have to see Confederate battle flags in here.
You might.
Exactly. And so I was trying, I want to figure this out. we're talking about business versus, we're talking about money, okay, versus acceptability in some ways. And it is a catch-22. I mean, it is a sweet spot. Can you speak to the conversation around, living in a city like Atlanta, living in Southwest Atlanta, living in South DeKalb, living in Stone Mountain, or in these particular areas, and what that means? I mean, it's nice homes, but do you get the equity?
Yeah, no, you don't. So here's the problem. And I talked about this in my New York Times op-ed on Sunday. The housing market is racist. Depending on how many Black people are in the neighborhood really determines the value of your home. So you can pick up a home in a Black neighborhood, and if you were to move it to a white neighborhood, it would increase in value significantly. So that's just messed up, right? But that's the market that we live in. And people see how white Americans have built wealth with their homes. And they then say, all we need to do to solve the racial wealth gap is to increase the homeownership rate among Black Americans. No. What they ignore is the racism baked into the homeownership market by 21st century white homeowners. There's research that shows, research has been done showing the following. They had a single neighborhood and they paid actors to walk through the neighborhood. One set of actors, they were all white. A different set of actors were all Black. And then a third set, 60% were white and 40% were Black. And they asked people who saw the video which neighborhood they wanted to live in. Well, the white people who saw the video wanted to live in the all-white neighborhood. You can't say it's because of crime, because it was the same neighborhood. It was just Black people, right? You can't say it's because of social amenities, underfunded schools. No, it was the identical, the identical neighborhood. So what you have is white Americans who don't want to live around too many Black Americans, even though they consider themselves progressive. So now a little side note. I did research on homeownership. And I started in 2007, 2008, and I was making the transition from Washington and Lee to Emory. Mm-hmm. So I had my house up for sale and it hadn't sold yet, and I'm doing this research. Well, my house was on a racially diverse street, and I was having trouble selling the house. And I contrasted that with the experience I had when I moved from the University of Cincinnati to Washington and Lee. It was in an all-white subdivision. There were like 200 homes. There was me and another Black family. And I didn't even meet that Black family, so I was about to move out. I sold that house in 3 weeks, no problem, made money. The house in Virginia, it just wasn't selling. Meanwhile, I start doing this research, which I was completely unaware of. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm having trouble selling this house because of me and neighbors who look like me. So but every time I presented the research, the white law professors basically lost their minds, right? They were like, that can't be right. It's gotta be class. It's crime, it's schools, it's everything, it's wealth. First of all, wealth is race. You can't say that about race, it's about wealth, but you can if you're a white faculty member who doesn't know what you're talking about, right? So I learned that whenever I would go to present this paper, it was going to be hand-to-hand combat. So I accept that, and in all of the chapters in the book, I think the homeownership chapter may give white Americans more trouble than virtually any other chapter, because progressive white people do not believe they engage in racist behavior. And what that chapter shows, well, here's what I learned over time. I get the pushback, and then I'd ask, oh, so tell me about your neighborhood. How many Black neighbors do you have? Silence. Next question, okay? So I learned to just, let's talk, and when they say, I don't think I have any, and then I respond, yes, and that didn't stop you from buying a house and moving in. So see, this is a widespread problem. And then there's, requisite hand wringing. How do we fix this? Yeah, stop being racist. But I digress.
So, you truly bring up something that's interesting in terms of that. You present data in this book that talks about there are a series of interviews that are done with conservative Republicans and with liberal Democrats. And the numbers are not that far off. I mean, I think 46% of Republican conservatives say something like they believe that Black people are lazy and just don't want to pull themselves up. But it's 24 or 25% of the liberal Democrats. It shows that, it's in some ways in this idea, it's okay to have these racist ideas.
And
but I want, go ahead.
No, you go.
But in discussing that, because this is where we're talking about policies. I mean, we can talk about, whether or not we have Black friends and white friends and whatever or not. But the true get down to it are these discriminatory policies that are not allowing marginalized people, particularly Black people, to even move further. Even the conversation, and this is an issue amongst Black Americans. Black Americans will say, well, we've suffered the worst. And I am not taking away from the experiences of Black folk. Indigenous people have suffered too. I mean,
absolutely.
LGBTQIA suffer, Latinx. But the interesting thing is that Latinx, as harsh as things are, haven't been hit as hard as Black communities. And I believe that has to do with the reason that Black people were brought here versus Latinx. But can you speak to that?
I think it depends. So I will say in all of my research, so there's a racial wealth gap between Latinx and white Americans, like there is between Black Americans. Mm-hmm. And the racial wealth gap with Indigenous Americans, we don't know because the data isn't available. And I would submit the racial wealth gap with Indigenous communities is probably greater than all, but we just don't have the data.
We don't have the data, yes.
We don't have it. So, but when I've done retirement research, who has jobs that comes with employer-provided retirement accounts, the data on Latinx scares the bejesus out of me. They have the lowest percentage of people who work for employers that provide it, and when they do, they aren't able to take advantage of it. So there are areas where Latinx are falling even further behind than Black Americans. I focused the book on Black and white because that was Jerome's charge, and I believe that this book fulfills his charge, but I want my book to inspire other people to look at other racial and ethnic groups, because racism in America is complicated, but white supremacy means all people of color lose. No matter what you think, the system is designed for white people to win and other people of color to lose. And how it happens is different. You see, Asian Americans are discriminated against differently. They're treated as foreign. They're attacked, right? But when someone wants to beat up on a Black person, they say, oh, Asian Americans are the model minority. And I've written an article that talked about if Asian Americans are the model minority, why aren't they running Silicon Valley? Because they are disproportionately employed. But they're not CEOs. They're not running companies because they're not the model minority. They're only the model minority when they can be used to beat up on Black people, right? Why can't you do it? So every racial and ethnic group is disadvantaged by white supremacy, and the key is not falling into the trap of thinking, I call it oppression Olympics, right? No, I'm oppressed more than you. Look, we're all oppressed. Okay, white supremacy gets us all. So let's work together to fix it, and not I'm harmed more than you.
This is and so what Professor Brown is saying. So for you social scientists out here, you young budding legal scholars, Professor Brown is not only a lawyer but a legal scholar. I mean, an excellent legal scholar. What is being said here is that we need more people to really take on looking at the wealth gap with Latinx, with indigenous folk, with different kinds of Black people. I mean, from the continent versus, the Caribbean, Black American, and whatnot. So it's right for the taking. I want to segue into this conversation around in the Black community in which I grew up, they would call it the good job, making that good money.
Yes.
I want to talk about this because so many of us have been geared to say, you want to graduate from high school, go to college and get that good job. It reminds me of Calvin, the McDonald's commercials that used to come on Saturday mornings with Calvin. And Calvin, he's the manager. He got a good job. Can you talk to us about the best job and what that means?
Yes, the best jobs are the jobs like I have that comes with health insurance and retirement accounts. Those are the best jobs. Occupational segregation targets those jobs for white Americans. They target, or I should say, occupational segregation means there are certain jobs that are held by white people. There are certain jobs that are held by Black people. There are certain jobs that are held by Latinx. And the jobs that are held by Black Americans, Latinx, are less likely to come with those good benefits. Why are they good? Because they're tax-free. Health insurance, tax-free. Retirement accounts, tax-free. So if you don't have access to that, when you retire, what do you have? You're relying on Social Security. But we all know Social Security isn't enough. So having access to the retirement account is key. And if you don't, then you got to be like Rachel that starts her own 401k. And as I say in the book, if you have a Rachel in your life, just follow her around and do what she says. That is one of the most financially savvy people I have ever come across in my life. I wasn't that savvy at her age. So, hats off to Rachel. So you get these good paying jobs and you wind up, a Black person could get a good paying job. But the problem is you have a family. And I'm not talking about married with kids. I'm talking about mom and dad and grandma and grandpa or brother and sister who, because of systemic racism, have financial needs. Research shows that Black college graduates are more likely to send money home to family members, to mothers, grandmothers, but white college graduates are more likely to receive money from their parents and grandparents. Okay, those gifts are tax-free. But when Black people make payments to support family members because of Jim Crow that they experienced, they don't get a tax break for that. So you can even get a good job with those great benefits, but you won't be able to take advantage of the retirement account, for example, because you're paying somebody's rent so they don't get evicted. Or if you do have a retirement account, you have to withdraw money to pay for somebody's financial catastrophe, and that money is taxed, and you pay a penalty because you withdrew it early. So you can have a good job, but you're sitting next to your white coworker and you're like scratching your head. How are they sending their kids to private school, K through 12, and I'm barely making ends meet? Well, likely your colleague has mom and the bank of mom and dad who are paying for their grandkids to go to K through 12 private school, and they graduated with their parents paying off their debt. Their parents gave a down payment for a house. Life is good. And you're sitting there scratching your head. How did I get here? And after you read my book, you're going to find out, and you paid more taxes for the privilege.
Well, and I mean, you do an excellent job with that. I remember one of the passages made the statement that a white person who graduates from high school with a high school diploma still has 10 times wealth of a Black person. I mean, we're talking about, it's roughly about 300 years. It is stated that if Black people are to catch up, if Black wealth is to catch up with white wealth, that Black people must live 4 lifetimes of 70 years just to catch up. So 300 years in slavery, 300 years behind. You see where that's going. But I want to ask you this question. When one writes a book, oftentimes there are stories that are cut from the manuscript. The things are edited and it's cut. Can you give me one of those stories that you were able to uncover in your research that did not necessarily make the book?
So the story actually was my story with buying and selling homes. So my parents' story is in the book. My story is not. So I start with the all-white neighborhood. I think this is the way it's supposed to work. Then I get a home in a racially diverse neighborhood. Then I barely got out alive, right? I sold for a loss, but more than the mortgage. So it wasn't a short sale or anything. I walked away with money. I was very happy. And again, I was doing this research. So I'm like, okay, fool me once, shame on you. You're not getting me another time. So when I moved to Emory, what did I do? I didn't buy, I rented. Step one, I rented because I could not figure out the real estate market in Atlanta. I'm from New York. I study real estate. I mean, I like paying attention to it. I could not make heads or tails of the Atlanta real estate market. There were some neighborhoods, they shoot up. And then a year later, they crash with no explanation. It's like, okay, I can't figure out this market. It doesn't make sense. I'm not going to buy, but I'm not going to buy in Atlanta, but I'm going to buy. And think about it. I know this research, and I'm gonna lead up to it. I know this research. Where did I buy? So I know the research that says in a white area, you get a good financial investment. Oh, I want a good financial investment. But in a white area, you have to do racism triage. Okay, I don't want no craziness. I don't want to go where white people are crazy. I bought a house on Martha's Vineyard. It is white, but black. Okay, I spend the summers there and I'm like, hey, all the black people, hey. So I love it. It's a great financial investment. And the white people at Martha's Vineyard go to Martha's Vineyard knowing they're going to see black people regularly. It is very rare that there's a racial incident. If there's a racial incident, people up there lose their minds. This isn't who we are. What's wrong with you? So I bought in a white area with a lot of black people. But I decided never to tie a job to a home again. That was another lesson I learned. I couldn't sell that house in Virginia forever. And then I finally did. And I'm like, I don't ever want a job tied to a mortgage. So that story didn't make the cut.
Wow, that is wise. That is real insight. One of the things I love about this book, Professor Brown, is that oftentimes, again, I have to look at historians versus other folk, is historians can identify the problem, but what you do so beautifully is you provide solutions. Can you talk to us about how can we really, narrow this wealth gap between black and whites?
So, I want to go through, so each chapter I have different solutions, and then I have, here's how we really need to fix the tax code. So I'm going to talk about here's how we really need to fix the tax code. And if any of you want to talk about individual chapter solutions in the Q&A, let's have at it. So the first thing, I spent a book documenting how Black Americans paid more taxes. First thing we need to do is pay those people back, right? So I suggest a reparations tax credit for all Black Americans whose taxes were higher. Well, don't get too excited because it's going to be ruled unconstitutional. The Supreme Court will not allow a reparations tax credit, okay? But I have a second best alternative, which is a wealth credit. The Supreme Court will allow a wealth credit because the court has decided wealth is not a suspect classification. Suspect classification is fancy language for you can do it. You can discriminate based on wealth and it be constitutional. That's the bottom line. So my wealth-based credit would flow to every taxpayer who had below median wealth. That's going to disproportionately benefit Black Americans who have paid higher taxes, but it's also going to include white Americans, which is why the Supreme Court would find it constitutional. So to compensate for the decades of extra taxes, there would be a wealth tax credit. Then what I would want is to restructure the tax code. I get rid of the deductions. I get rid of the tax-free gifts. I get rid of home sales that would be tax-free. All of that goes bye-bye. It's all income. It's all taxed. You would get a living allowance. And a living allowance would be based on where you live and what it costs for you to financially thrive. Not minimum wage, it's not enough. A living allowance would say, if you make more than the living allowance, you would pay taxes at the progressive tax rate. If you make less than a living allowance, the federal government writes you a check for the difference. So how I want to solve the problem is to kind of go back to the roots of our progressive tax system in 1913, which is you have a system where the richest Americans paid more, paid their fair share, and those without a living allowance would not pay as much. So that's my solution for the tax system. And people ask me, so are you optimistic about what the Biden administration is going to do? So first of all, his first act in office was signing an executive order that called for racial equity. And he mandated across the government, they would look at statistics based on race, gender, disability. I want to focus on race. And he included the Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy, person who works in Treasury. Now, that's good, because what I want to see are race and tax data. I want never again a tax reform proposal to be put forth in Congress without a racial analysis and a racial wealth gap impact analysis, right? So that's a given. The problem is the people at Treasury don't have a history of understanding race. So I think there's a disconnect between the president and his commitment to racial equity and the people he's put in those positions. So hopefully, this book will get attention, people will start paying attention, and we'll see the president being more explicit in the Treasury coming up with racial analysis.
Excellent. That's an excellent point. The conversation around reparations is up and running, and it's a serious conversation. I would be interested in your thoughts on it. I mean, I know you talked about how the courts would see it, but I'd be interested in your thoughts about this, because on some levels, the U.S. government has paid reparations to other marginalized groups, not African descended people. But then the question is, how do we really quantify or understand who is eligible and who is not? Do you have any thoughts about that? And I mean, I know it will be a whatever your opinion is about it will be based on what you understand in terms of facts.
So first I'll say Sandy Darity and I think Kristen Mullen wrote a book, From Here to Equality. It's a whole book on reparations. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I can't give a summary.
Yeah, it's a piece.
Right. So, but he has this huge figure, which is kind of conservative on what might be owed, right? So to me, the reparations question I find interesting is, let's say every Black person in America got $100,000. If we put that into a system designed to build white wealth, it's not going to help us. So before we get to reparations, we need to fix the system for wealth building in America. Because if not, reparations will be paid and it will flow out of our pockets in a not good way. So, my thing about reparations is, yes, they're owed. Yes, they've been paid to everybody but us. But let's talk about what meaningful reparations would look like. And I'm a former investment banker, so I'm like, yeah, let's give everybody $100,000. I'm okay with the money, but where are we going to put it? Are we going to put it in a system that's designed to create white wealth? So I think the conversation has to be recognizing the racism in how wealth is built in America. And can I say, I saw a question that said they were confused about, I don't want to tie a mortgage to a job. What I mean is, I'm not buying a house where I live. That's what it means. So I rent.
Absolutely. I certainly understand. So I want to open it up to questions that are in the Q&A.
Yeah, and I'll just say, and Carol's right. Why did I buy a house in Martha's Vineyard? Because that's where I plan to retire.
I understand. I understand.
And Delta has a lot of flights from Atlanta to Boston.
So, one question is would there have been any benefit to Black married couples filing separately?
Great question, and no. The married filing separate box that you can check, it generally leads to higher taxes, not lower taxes. People file that way because they don't want to get tagged with whatever it is their spouse is doing. So to give you an example, John McCain filed separately from his wife, Cindy McCain. Cindy McCain had all the money. And she had her own business, and he didn't want to get caught. Either he didn't want to get caught up in it, or she didn't want to tell him what was going on in her business. So married filing separately means she files her return, he files his. If she does something wrong, the government can't come after her. Married filing jointly means if you and your husband or you and your partner have different businesses, if it's a joint and several liability, the IRS could come after you for something your spouse did. So married filing separately never helps you financially. It does help you from a peace of mind and a legal perspective.
Certainly understand. There's another question that asks, would reparations or the idea of reparations be taxable income?
Under the Brown system, yes. But if I were supporting reparations, I would make it tax-free, right? Because under the Brown system right now, I'm trying to include everything in the income. But no, there's no way reparations should be taxable.
Absolutely. I'm waiting on more questions from the audience to come through. So
in the meantime, you can ask me some more.
I can. I certainly can. What discovery is always an interesting research, and discovery is something that is always eye-opening. My own experience is when I initially began to study civil rights and began to do the work on Atlanta 20 plus years ago, I assumed that Atlanta was going to be A, B, and C. And when I really looked at the data and pulled all the stuff back, presented a very different kind of concept. And one of the things I had to do in writing my own work is I had to really draw a line in the sand to make people know and understand that I am taking a very different approach to this. What was some of the discovery that you were able to really understand in doing this research? I mean, I know you talked about it briefly, but some of the things, I mean, when you finished writing the book, did you say that one thing that you learned was that you didn't know anything? Because the discovery part is something that is always mind-blowing.
You know, I learned the relentlessness of white supremacy in writing this book and researching this book. The statistic that a white high school dropout has more wealth than a Black college graduate, always blows me away. So there were moments in time where I would run across something and say, oh no, it's like, I thought it was bad, but this is like so much worse. So, finding it, and I will say what led me to this book was doing my parents' tax returns and doing my tax returns and their tax returns and saying, I make what they make combined. They're paying too much in taxes, but I have an LLM from NYU in tax. I'm not making a mistake. I know what I'm doing, but I just came away thinking something's wrong. I don't know what it is. And I would, do their taxes and say something's wrong. I don't know what it is. And then the next year would come around and I'd do their taxes and I'd say, oh, mommy made more money than daddy this year. And they're paying too much in taxes. And fast forward, I became an academic and picked up Jerome's article and said, race and tax, I'm going to look. And the first thing I wrote had to do with the marriage penalty and the marriage bonus. And I figured out why my parents paid too much in taxes. So that was really the impetus behind my race and tax work. It was this subconscious, what is going on? I can't figure it out. It's nagging me. And then when I read the statistic that said 41% of Black wives contribute 41% to household income and white wives contribute 29%, that means nothing to you. But it meant everything to me in terms of the marriage penalty bonus. And it was like, oh my God, my parents are paying too much in taxes because they're married to each other. If they had lived in sin, they'd have had a lot more money.
Well, so let me ask you, here's another question. It's a great question too. There's a lot of media attention on Black women entrepreneurs. Based on your research, are there ways Black women business owners are also being overtaxed?
Oh, heck yes. It's called the singles penalty. Okay. So there's a marriage penalty. There's a singles penalty. So, and here's how it works. And I'm single, so I'm paying it right with you, sister. Okay. Singles penalty. If I were married and making the same income and I had a stay-at-home spouse, my tax bill would be what? But because I'm single, I'm paying higher taxes, and that's called the single penalty. So Black women who are disproportionately not married are in fact paying a singles penalty. And that is before we even talk about how is the Black entrepreneur conducting business. Is it a partnership? Is it a subchapter C? Is it an LLC? Before we even get to any of those crazy questions, you're a single Black woman, yeah, you're paying the singles penalty.
So there's a follow-up. Are there any tips that you have for Black women business owners?
Yeah, so I have tips along the way. With respect to homeownership, when you buy, be intentional. If you're going to buy in a racially diverse or all Black neighborhood, don't be house poor. Do not spend all your money on a house. Save some, put it into retirement, put it into a 529 for your kid, put it in the stock market. Do not put it all in your house. If you're going to be house poor, do it in a white neighborhood. Now, as I said before, you have some problems, right? And if you got a Black child, you're going to have to do battle with the school administrators who are always going to say they're misbehaving no matter what it is they're doing. Okay, because my friends who have children who live in white neighborhoods, they have this all the time. Okay, so with respect to, an entrepreneur, I'm going to tell you, spend some money on a tax attorney, a really good tax attorney or tax accountant, so they can get you every freaking loophole that Trump put in that tax plan.
Wow. So here's another question. What is the purpose of the income limit on writing off student loan interest?
It's designed, so the argument is we don't want to help high income people pay off their debt. They can pay it off without the tax subsidy, but it cuts off at like $85,000 or $170 if you're married, which is like not rich. So there's the stated reason, and the real reason was probably that's the number they needed to get to for the tax bill math to add up. That's my bottom line. There's no intellectual reason for it. There's no income cutoff on a mortgage. Why would there be an income cutoff for student loan?
Understood. Here's another question. In relation to the disconnect between the president and the staff at the Treasury not doing or having the expertise, willingness, practice of conducting race analysis when planning to implement new tax policy, what is a feasible way of remedying this problem?
People have to make it clear that they expect him to live up to his word, and they expect the president to do it. So he's talking about a tax plan, but he's also talking about racial equity, but he's not connecting racial equity to the tax plan. Somebody needs to ask the president, what's the racial impact of your tax proposals? right? Some reporter, some, concerned citizens, somebody who knows the president needs to ask him to explain the disconnect, right? So he's busy. We're in a pandemic and he's doing an amazing job rolling out the vaccine. So I get it. But when I hear talk about, oh yeah, these tax provisions, and I'm like, I want to see the racial analysis, because you can't sign an executive order and then say, check the box, I'm done. So I think there needs to be pressure placed on Treasury. I think there needs to be pressure placed on Biden. And I think anytime you see a newspaper story that talks about tax, you should tweet, you should email, you should send a message to the reporter. What about race? That's how we do it.
Wow. Here's another question. How do those of us with high incomes, but all of the built-in penalties, married to equal wage earners, student loans times 2, extended families to support, etc., manage tax liability?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And, the answer is it's hard. My mother had a rule. Whenever she got a raise, she would act like she didn't get a raise. She would put it in a retirement account. Now, my mother, if we sent her to DC, could balance the budget. She'd get rid of the deficit because she's just that good, right? But that's like a little trick. When you get a raise, act like you didn't have it and like squirrel the money away somehow. But also in terms of tax liability, get an accountant. People are like, but they're expensive. Oh, they're worth their weight in gold if you ever get into tax trouble. And their job is to see to it that you don't get into tax trouble. And if you are into tax trouble, get some help. It's not going to go away. It's like my father used to say, if the car is making noise, don't ignore it, because it's not going to fix itself. It's just going to get worse. So, confront it, get some help, and go for it.
Sounds great. Let me see if there are any new questions. I'll ask you this question. What do you want readers to take from your new book?
I want readers to take that it really is hard for Black Americans to build wealth, and it's through no fault of your own. It's not that you need a financial literacy course. Research shows that doesn't work. It's not that you can just work harder. You don't control white people's racist decision making. So what you can do is be defensive. Okay, I know people are going to act a certain way, so I'm going to defend my territory by acting a certain way. It really requires a level of intentionality on us that white privilege, allows white Americans to skate by without having to address. So it's just, paying attention and being aware and knowing it's not you. This is messed up. And we're in a moment where I actually think we can fix it. I actually think we can have a conversation about systemic racism in taxes in a way because of the summer of 2020. So let me just tell you, the first thing I published was in 1996. I can count on one hand with like 4 fingers left over the number of white reporters who have ever talked to me about race and tax before the summer of 2020. And now I would have to take off my socks and shoes, okay? Because a lot of white reporters are now talking to me. I don't know if you saw it, but I think it was last week's Bloomberg Business Week. I'm on the cover and it says, is the tax code racist? That only happens after the summer of 2020, where we watched George Floyd be murdered. And look, Black people knew this was happening all along. White people didn't. This was news to them. And I got calls from white male reporters starting this summer wanting to talk to me about race and tax, about systemic racism in corporate America. Suddenly, there were white reporters who wanted to do better. And I think this is a moment. I think your voice matters. I think you amplifying what you've heard today, what you'll read in the book matters. And you just don't let it go. You just don't let it go. Somebody talks about taxes. Excuse me, what's the racial implication? I was on a phone call a week ago, and somebody said, well, have you heard about this proposal? And I said, yes. that I haven't seen a racial analysis, and until I do, I'm not responding. And there was this pause. Well, that's a good point. So, a year ago, that wouldn't have been a reaction. It was like, oh, there she goes again. Now it's like, oh, she makes a good point.
Well, I will say this, family. You have witnessed the brilliance of Professor Dorothy Brown of Emory University, the late James and Dottie Brown's daughter. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Oh, there's some more questions that are come up. So before I sign off, I want to make sure that we get everyone.
Great.
Let me do this. This is a powerful presentation. I mean, for so many reasons. So here's a question. Since the new interest in this topic, have you encountered some who argue that these racial disparities in tax codes are actually not race-based?
Oh, yes. yes, and yes. So I'm trying to think. I think this was in response to the New York Times piece on Sunday. This isn't race, it's class. Yeah, no. Okay, you didn't read the piece, right? So white Americans are very comfortable talking about class because there are poor white people, right? When we talk about race and racism and anti-Black racism, white people can't be victims of anti-Black racism. So they don't like that. So they want to shift the topic to class. So yes, I totally get it's about class. I'll tell you some other comments I got in response to the New York Times piece. It's about crime. It's about, one of my favorites. It's Black homes are devalued because Black kids look up to rappers and basketball players.
Wow.
Yes. So yes, there are people, but what I'm finding is there are way more people who are saying, I never thought about this before. She's right. So I'm very optimistic that the message is resonating. Again, post George Floyd's murder in a pandemic with a lot of white Americans working from home, right? So, this occupational segregation means Black and Latinx workers are more, and Asian American workers are more likely to be essential workers and out of the house. White folks are at home, watch TV, or watching George Floyd, or out demonstrating, right? So it was a unique moment in time because I don't believe George Floyd his murder has the impact it had if we're not in a pandemic. No way. Because there have been so many other George Floyds.
Absolutely.
We've never had this response. Why? Because so many white people were trapped at home watching it on TV.
There's one more question. What are your thoughts? This is a legal question here. There's actually two more questions. What are your thoughts regarding Section 42 of the U.S. Tax Code, 1986, low-income housing tax credits, and the Opportunity Zone tax shelter from the 2017 Jobs and Tax Cuts legislation? Most of the beneficiaries of these programs are white. So they want Yes.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. I'm not a low-income housing tax credit fan. I'm not an Opportunity Zone fan because what that does is it doesn't really build up the neighborhoods that you want built up, and it just makes white developers rich and white capital gain investors rich. So no, bad idea.
Absolutely. The next question is, African Americans have voted heavily for Democrats over the past 70 years. Does your research reveal any disparities in the Democrats' tax policies compared, and if so, which tax policy is more detrimental to African Americans? Does party affiliation determine your taxes?
So I will say whether a Republican was in office or a Democrat was in office, Black people paid higher taxes, right? So, these policies that I talk about were put into place by Democrats and Republicans. What did they have in common? They were white. Okay, so we had one Black president, and our Black president didn't talk about race and taxes, right? President Obama didn't talk about race often because every time the man did, he got slammed for it. So he's like, you know what? I mean, you know this, his approval ratings after the Skip Gates incident with white Americans went down and never came back. So he learned, okay, never mind. So, I think with President Biden signing that executive order that called for disaggregation of data by race across government agencies, he has the potential to do more than any other president on this issue. But I'm telling you, because I'm watching who's getting put in the Treasury, it ain't gonna happen if we don't force the change.
Family, you have witnessed the brilliance of Professor Dorothy Brown of Emory University. Please, if you get a chance, grab this book, The Whiteness of Wealth. I mean, this is a really white book too. I mean, it's really, really white. Thank you so much for spending time with us. This is your first book talk, and this has been eye-opening on so many levels. So I want you to know that you have an ally in me at Georgia State University and just in the hood here in Atlanta, in South DeKalb. And I am so grateful and honored to spend this time with you. So thank you.
Thank you all for listening. You're listening to me talk about tax on a Tuesday night. Do you know how excited you're making me? Thank you so much.
All right. I hope that you all have a great night. And at this time, we'll bring in ER.
Yes, thank you all. Thanks for such deep, thoughtful questions. Y'all know a lot about taxes already. I think we have some business people in the audience. I love it, and this was beautiful. So I wish you well on the rest of your tour, and everybody buy this book.
Thanks.
Take care. Have a great night.